Welcome to Daily Drive for Wednesday, June 17th, 2026. I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, Mitsubishi gives U.S. dealers a look at the product pipeline they've been waiting for. Chevy's redesigned Silverado is here, and we've got the details. And Stellantis takes a swing at the global robotaxi market. Plus, AlixPartners Mark Wakefield joins us from the Center for Automotive Research's Management Briefing Seminars to talk about China's AI advantage and what USMCA renegotiation could really cost the industry.
I think the more it focuses on US only, the worse it's likely going to be at focusing on China.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. Mitsubishi's dealers have been itching for a look at the automaker's future, and now they've got it. At a June 5th meeting near Chicago, Mitsubishi previewed a wave of new models under its Momentum 2030 plan. They include the brand's first modern EV arriving this fall, a rugged Pajero-based SUV potentially badged as the Montero, a redesigned Outlander, and a pickup co-developed with Nissan. Dealers told Automotive News the shift is night and day from the brand's current aging lineup. Notably, Mitsubishi has dropped plans for future full battery electric vehicles in favor of hybrid powertrains, citing evolving U.S. regulations. We'll have more on this story in a minute with our own Urvash Kakaria. Chevrolet is pulling the wraps off its redesigned 2027 Silverado 1500, and GM is counting on it to be a hit. The truck gets bolder styling, a tech-heavy interior, and two new V8 engines, going on sale late this year with 7 trims. The Silverado and its sibling, the GMC Sierra, combined for nearly a third of GM's U.S. new vehicle sales in 2025. That makes a smooth production changeover critical as GM navigates tariff cost and EV investment pressures. Notably absent from the new lineup, a hybrid option. And Stellantis is entering the global robotaxi race. The automaker signed a non-binding agreement with Uber and Wave to deploy Level 4 autonomous ride-hailing vehicles worldwide. Stellantis supplies the vehicles, Uber brings its ride-sharing platform, and Wave provides the software. The partnership builds on an existing Wave-Uber deal to launch in London, Tokyo, and 10 other cities. The stakes are high. A Goldman Sachs report puts the global robotaxi market at $400 billion by 2035. And those are today's headlines. You can find more details on all those stories at autonews.com. Joining me now is Urvash Kakaria, Atlanta Bureau Chief here at Automotive News, to talk more about his scoop about Mitsubishi's product blitz. Urvash, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Thanks for having me, Kel. Hope you're doing well.
All right, same to you, sir. So, Mitsubishi's U.S. sales have been sliding for years. Do dealers actually believe this product roadmap will turn things around, or is there still skepticism?
Yeah, there was definitely some concern from the retailers we spoke with after this meeting about the actual execution of the plan. They liked what they saw. One dealer referred to it as the difference is night and day between what's coming and what the brand currently has. But they were not provided any details about the product. They saw mock-ups, they saw some actual vehicles, but there were no details about the powertrain, about the specs, the performance specs, or even the market timing. When are they coming to market? So as you know, some dealers told me, they've gone from talking about the product to at least showing some of the product, but that's still quite a bit of a distance from actually delivering that product to their showrooms, to dealer showrooms. I was able to talk to some people and figure out, estimates on when some of these models will actually come to market, will come to stores. But at this point, it's a toss-up if this entire lineup actually happens, or if some of the models further out in the future, like the SUV, which is still under consideration, whether that actually, arrives here.
Now, Mitsubishi is walking away from full EVs in favor of hybrids. Now, what's driving that shift, and what happens if regulators change course in 2 short years?
Yeah, like many automakers, Mitsubishi sort of realizes that at least in the near to midterm, EV demand is expected to be somewhat suppressed as U.S. regulations have changed. So they are sort of pivoting. They're not unique in this. What's interesting, though, is that they're pivoting almost wholesale towards hybrids, whether that's mild hybrids, whether that's traditional hybrids, or whether that's plug-in hybrids. I'm told that basically all future product starting after 2027, all models arriving after 2027 will be electrified only. So they are not going to basically be delivering any gas only models or gas only product. So, they clearly feel that uh, that's where that hybrids are where the demand is. And in terms of whether regulation changes, even if regulation changes, even if the next administration is more favorable towards EVs, the leap from hybrids to EVs will be a lot quicker and a lot less expensive than going from ICE only to EVs directly, all electric vehicles directly. So they feel like other automakers that they can make that switch without much fuss, if that's what it comes to.
All right, perfect. Urvash, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Kel.
AlixPartners Global Automotive Market Lead, Mark Wakefield, sat down with our own Hannah Lutz on the sidelines of the Center for Automotive Research's Management Briefing Seminars in Ypsilanti, Michigan. They've covered a lot of ground, from how Chinese automakers are using AI to redefine the in-vehicle experience to what it would actually cost the industry if USMCA gets a major overhaul.
Hi, I'm Hannah Lutz, Assistant Managing Editor of Content for Automotive News. I'm at the Center for Automotive Research Management Briefing Seminars in Ypsilanti, Michigan today, and Mark Wakefield of AlixPartners is joining me. He's Global Automotive Market Lead at AlixPartners. So welcome. Thanks for sitting down with us.
Thank you, Anna.
So China has been a big theme here. You were on a panel discussing the competition with China. What is the role, you didn't really get to this, what is the role of artificial intelligence when we think about competition between the US or North America and China?
Well, China, from an automotive perspective, is not really thinking about the US for AI. They've been putting AI mostly into infotainment for many years, and they have it's sort of a natural feature that's assumed in most Chinese mid to high level cars now, to a degree that doesn't exist in US cars. And pretty much every automaker is doing it there. They're now moving into, you've heard of SDVs, of software-defined vehicles. They're now moving into sort of an AI-defined vehicle, in the sense of that instead of just being able to OTA changes, having more and more enablement of learning in the vehicle. So we've always had a degree of that, the machine learning of a transmission that got used to you and did that sort of thing. It's taking that to a much higher level. And it's doing it to compete with the other 100 and something automakers that they're competing with. It's not really focused on, what are the Germans doing or what are the Americans doing in the vehicle.
What does that look like in practice? What would the consumer experience of a highly AI influenced car be?
The infotainment they would already be seeing, and the connective was you're basically having an extension of both your mobile life, but as well as the large language models that allow you to do natural speech and have conversation with your vehicle. So it could suggest things of, if you said right now, if you're in a Zeekr, you can say, could you roll the right rear window down halfway? And it'll go, "Zook," do that, right? That's not a literal voice command like drive to tuk tuk tuk.
Right.
That's taking language and applying it then in the vehicle. But there's also then the learning of how do you drive, where do you drive, how to condition the battery, how to get charge out of this or that, how to then help you get out of accidents and help you. It learns your driving style. It learns what you're doing badly and where each of us I might get an accident in parking lots, and you might get an accident on the highway, or more propensity to do so. As a vehicle learns, it sort of can adjust its driving assistance. That's much more advanced AI, because now you're getting into stuff that matters versus sort of, pick the right song, or
Sure.
what's the temperature I like my car at, or this sort of stuff.
Yeah, and that's very personal based on what it's seen of your driving
Still
patterns.
very personal.
Yeah.
Yes, which is, it's not entirely new, because that's, we had these transmissions that did that, engines and other things, but it's to a whole nother level when you're actually got true AI empowered, and you've got like a central compute that has, actuation, but it's all actually available to that central compute to change something.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about capacity, China's auto production capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Where does it stand now, and when do you see it tapering off or increasing?
So a lot of open capacity, and a lot made of the exports from that capacity. One thing that's often missed is the ones that are exporting are the more profitable, and the ones that have relatively less capacity. So the ones exporting have about a 1.5 higher profitability, and they have about 7 or 8 points higher capacity utilization. So it's not the weaker, absolutely desperate ones that are doing more of the exporting. And of course, exporting has to be very deliberate.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like, oh, I've got a bunch of extra, I'll send them to the discount bin in some continent somewhere.
Deliberate based on orders or based on expectations?
Based on plans. You have to be registered, you have to set up, it's not something you just, I've got a bunch of extra,
Sure.
Where can I throw them? And so you're seeing learning also, particularly in Europe, where some of the automakers didn't enter very well, and they wasted a bunch of money, but they've learned, and they're improving that. And you see that in Europe at the moment. You also see it in South America, you see it in Central America, you see it in Northern Africa, you see these trial and learns as they're going to it. They've, a few years ago, blew past Japan as the highest exporter. And it's funny because the rest of the curves all look kind of the same, and then the China line is wildly different.
Mm-hmm.
It is a strategy, and they do need to export because they make a lot more money on the exports. They know also, though, it's not a permanent thing. It's not like build in China and send everywhere approach. They know they're going to have to build plants in Europe. You have to build plants in South America, North America, or buy them. Like in Europe, to get around the IAA or to get under the wire of IAA, they're trying to buy plants and reuse it. And if you're a government, there's an element of, this is great because I keep the employment, and it's faster, better, cheaper, so consumers should theoretically win. So the element of that local politics of, I'm hurting Germany because the engineers don't engineer it anymore, but the 2,000 people in the plant in this part of Spain get the benefit. And so, all politics are local, and it gets down to then that decision. And the Chinese exporters are definitely having this pathway of, yes, I plan to be making the cars where I sell them.
When will they actually see that in a significant way, building the cars in different countries where they're sold?
Starting to see that in Europe, but by there's a race to the end of 2028. So you're going to see a boom in Europe of that. You've already started to see some of that in South America. They bought the old Ford plant. They've bought the plant in Spain. There's discussion on the Nissan plant in England. There's the new plant coming up in Eastern Europe that the BYD is doing, but to get to the timeline, there's a lot that's just being done as brownfield type stuff. It'll be interesting to see what happens in Mexico, and I think there's sort of a bit of a waiting game on how USMCA really goes. But other than North America, it's already happening where you're seeing plants come up.
As we see more of those plants in Europe or even Mexico and South America, how do you think the U.S. will respond, or North America will respond? Will the barrier get taller, or will it start to lower because we see it happening elsewhere?
I think the time period, you don't want a permanent wall, because then you end up in a spot that's uncompetitive. You want a temporary wall that allows the industry to change, but also trying to level playing fields and have an industrial policy that allows you to, over time, have a competitive industry and have a more self-sufficient industry. And that self-sufficient industry isn't likely to be one country. So the U.S. is not, it's be very uneconomic to try to make it an island. You have raw materials in Canada that could get build processing capacity in the U.S., have the battery assembled in Mexico, and then have the vehicle assembled in the U.S. That ought to be in everybody's interest in Washington and in Ottawa and in Mexico City to make that happen, and to do that as a way of truly addressing the Chinese subsidy approach, the Chinese threat, instead of trying to sort of get these suboptimal or very expensive solutions. It would behoove the government to look at a North America solution that's looking at the bigger picture versus unlike the milk tariff or the whatever thing that sort of is putting some noise into USMCA at the moment. The vehicles from Europe getting exported over here, there's the argument that the Germans are trying to make of, well, if I send one over there as a sedan and I have an SUV over in the US that's sent back, can I get this neutralized? And they're not being very successful with that argument. There's some validity to that argument, because in a premium market, it doesn't make sense to have the same vehicle built everywhere around the world, because there's just not enough volume to make it useful. So they're in a bit of a conundrum on that side. And you could easily see some requirements being put in that, depending on the Chinese content of a European vehicle, makes it more punitive than the current ones. But even Europe is already trying to do this, like, how many subsidies did you really get? And therefore this is what the level playing field approach of the current European side is. So that's the first level. The second level would be the vehicles coming to the US from Europe, how much Chinese content is in them.
So you mentioned North America working together, vehicles and parts passing through the US, Canada, and Mexico. And on July 1st, we'll have a formal renegotiation of the USMCA, the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement. How would significant changes or even a dismantling of that North American trade agreement affect competition with China?
Yeah, I think the more it focuses on US only, the worse it's likely going to be at focusing on China. I think everyone can see the idea of having the RVC, the regional value, being updated, and core, batteries being core and other things being added to update it and improve the sort of loopholes that you could send an ECU to Toronto and it would get updated and sent across, and now it's a Canadian part. Well, it's not really. Similarly, cheaper stuff going through Mexico and then showing up as Mexican parts. Well, not really. Mm-hmm. So there's things to be done to certainly improve that piece. But fundamentally, are you trying to make a North America supply base, or are you trying to make a US supply base? And I think anything that moves towards the US versus the North America is basically accepting a handicap against China to do that. It seems like the Mexican and Canadian governments are willing to do whatever is needed around the Chinese piece. But you're seeing some of the reactions, like the 49.999 whatever vehicles, just under 50,000 vehicles from Canada, wouldn't have happened with a belief that USMCA would be modernized and continued as a North American base. From cost perspective, if you get above 45% US content, if you get above like 70-ish% RVC, you start getting pretty expensive, and it starts adding to the cost of that. So what I was saying earlier in that talk was, at least if we're going to have tariffs, why not use that tariff money to put it back into the critical minerals path, into the processing, into making things better overall, versus just going to the US Treasury. And I think that sort of circularness to maintain a little better affordability and competitiveness, and set up the 10-year journey to have processing capacity and to have the infrastructure that's needed, would be a good direction to also see from it.
What about a bilateral or two bilateral? I guess it would be three, wouldn't it? 3 bilateral agreements. How would that affect the North American supply chain if it's the U.S. and Canada, U.S., et cetera?
I don't think it would change too much, because there's not actually that much that moves from Canada to Mexico. So that's not as huge a deal. It's more, how does it end up? And again, things like, it's not just a labor arbitrage of building the vehicle US versus Mexico. There is a significant element of raw materials that are available in Canada, and hydropower and nuclear power to do the processing and to do some of these things, that if you try to then replicate that, it just becomes expensive to do. So it's a choice. It could be done, but it gets expensive. So a bilateral that then doesn't sort of treat the bloc as a bloc and is focused between the borders instead of China versus North America is just by nature going to be suboptimal to fighting off the China piece, plus keeping affordability and technology moving in the U.S.
So recent reports have said that the Trump administration wants to increase the level of regional content in North American-built vehicles to 82% to qualify for the USMCA treatment, and 50% of that value would need to come from the United States. What do you think of that proposal?
That's going to be expensive. That's tens of billions. But if it was stable for 15 years, it would be something to be, and it was blended in and the same sort of 3.75% MSRP rebate, so that the parts, you had a rebate, you had other elements that blended it down over time, you could work towards this. But if you then also took the money from those tariffs, the extra money from those tariffs, and reinvested it into, like what happened in chips 20, 30 years ago, and sort of a pre-competitive cooperation around certain chips and technology, plus investment into mining and processing and the battery supply chain and the rare earth supply chain, that would make some sense. It would be costly to do that, though. Costly to do that shift. The 82, compared to what's now, isn't the same. It's also, you can't really compare the two because the rules will be much tighter on core and on what classifies for that. The labor piece as well, $16 an hour piece, that was easily got around with, okay, I'll put some engineering, and then that actually worked the opposite of what it was intended to do. So that's likely going to be changed too. And so it depends a bit on how some of the other terms go through to say exactly how expensive that's going to be. But yeah, that's more than 10, less than 40 billion probably in annual cost.
Wow. Okay. So most of the industry has been very adamant that the USMCA is a good thing, and it's really been the agreement that's helped the industry plan for the next several years, or the past several years also. Is there any part of the USMCA, though, that has been detrimental or that could be improved in this renegotiation?
Oh, many. Some of them get more sort of technical and small, but the ones I mentioned, like the sort of routes for China to send something expensive into Canada and then it becomes Canadian, or cheap into Mexico and it becomes Mexican, is a real problem. As I mentioned on the $16 an hour thing, that didn't work out at all like it was planned. So some of those things can be changed. The sort of parts rebate, then the parts rebate on the tariff of the U.S. components isn't even, that's not USMCA, but that's the thing applied on top of it that likely is going to come through in some manner. That's a fairly blunt approach to trying to incent U.S. content. An industrial policy would generally be better if it was more targeted towards what made sense to make where, based on the installed capacity, natural resources, labor rates, geographic difference in distance between assembly, and the focus on assembly should be higher. So where you put an assembly plant makes a lot more difference to the jobs and even to the engineering jobs, but even to those local jobs, than does component manufacturing. So fighting for something to come out of instead of being done by Linamar or Magna in Ontario and have it done 200 kilometers south of there, is adding industrial cost to it. Trying to recreate the aluminum flows and nickel and cobalt from Canada that's perfectly available is also sort of uneconomic. Having wire harnesses assembled in the US doesn't mean more jobs, it means more robots doing that. And if those robots don't come from the US, then you've then got something that the bill of materials looks good. And right now, the USMCA is very bill of materials focused. But you've got tool and die, you've got industrial equipment, and all sorts of other stuff that's very expensive being bought from China and shipped over here. USMCA doesn't really deal with that whole the bigger pictures.
Okay, we'll watch for all of that. And my last question for you is, when do you expect a result on the USMCA?
Oof.
If negotiations
Gosh,
start
that's a tough
formally
one.
on July 1st.
Well, not July 1st.
Yeah, not July 1st.
It's a tough one. That's, yeah.
I wonder how much do the midterms play a role? Do you think we'll see something before midterms?
I'm not really a political analyst, so, like a lot of the industry, I think it's a wait and see.
Okay.
For reading the tea leaves, not getting too excited if something's, on the 10-yard line or even on the 1-yard line. You're kind of waiting for things to be inevitably going over the goal line before you're starting to make real industrial investments and decisions.
AlixPartners global automotive lead Mark Wakefield spoke with our own Hannah Lutz at Car MBS in Ypsilanti, Michigan. That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to Automotive News executive producer Jake Neer, as well as our own Urvash Kakaria and John Irwin for their reporting for today's podcast. We also had reporting from Peter Siegel of our sibling publication, Automotive News Europe. You can get the latest news on Mitsubishi's product plans, the new Silverado, Stellantis' robotaxi push, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. Come back tomorrow for a conversation with Mike Stanton, CEO of NADA, about the FTC's advertising crackdown, Carvana's recent expansion, and how dealers are thinking about Chinese brands in 2026.
This is us taking a step back, getting educated, and taking a longer-term view in terms of our responsibilities to the industry and our country.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.